I'm so happy today to have Noah Blanton here. I'm saying your name right?
Yeah,
Okay.
you got it.
WFG president of Oregon,
Yep.
specifically, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. We're going to talk about housing, which is exciting to me. I don't know how exciting it is to everyone else, but I think you and I
We're excited about
excited.
it.
We're excited. Yeah.
All the interesting people must have been out of town, and so you called me.
No, it's just, I was just saying a second ago, it's like, it's such a popular topic, especially in local politics and every type of politics now, because there's a housing shortage everywhere. And so I'm just happy to actually have somebody who's like in the industry to talk about it. So thanks.
Yeah, you bet. And anytime I can talk about housing, I'm happy. So
Cool.
yeah.
Yeah, I was going to start off with, I was just going to say, I had met you probably about a year ago at my last job I was working at, and you were doing some like housing forecasting that was just really impressive to me with the FRED system, which is like the Fed's numbers system, or I don't know how
Yeah, the St. Louis Fed's data sets, and a lot of people use those, and it's called FRED.
Okay.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, it was just super interesting, and I was super impressed with that forecasting. And you kind of do that in the region, right? For different organizations.
I do a bit of speaking and forecasting on the subject, and try to help our clients plan for, what the cycle is going to be. And I do some forecasting for the Building Industry Association in Washington, and so yeah, I do a little bit of that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was just gonna start off with like what. I'll give you, because people ask me sometimes. People think I'm some kind of like housing guru. I'm not. I know a little bit. You know way more than me, but
I know a little bit too.
I always tell people from my opinion and perspective that like there's a nationwide housing shortage all over, but it's acute and it's extreme here in Portland, in our region. And I just kind of leave it at that. I just kind of leave it to their imagination as to why that is.
Yeah.
But would you say that's accurate? Like how would you describe the region's housing market?
Yeah.
Health.
I would say that, and I'm going to say my most unfavorite word when talking about things like this, but I mean, that's a really complex, it's very easy to say housing and there's a shortage, and in a moment in time that might be true, but housing is a really long-term cycle. And so do we have a housing shortage today in the Northwest and in Portland? Yes. I mean, I think that's probably true. But I also think, looking at where we're at in the cycle, oftentimes what we're talking about is what's happened 12 or 18 months ago, and not what's actually happening today. And I think you'd probably have to go all the way back to the 2005 through 8 housing crisis to really understand why we're in the position we're in today. It's not a 2-year problem or a 3-year problem. It's probably a 16-year cycle that started with the Great Recession and was made more acute through COVID. But those are both, in some ways, artificially created boom bust cycles.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, just as a for instance, so when we came out of 2008, if you look at building permits in the state of Oregon and the metro area, we never put as many single family housing units in the market in any given year ever since 2005, 6, 7.
Okay. Wow. Yeah.
So we started putting basically half of the single family residential into the marketplace and continued that for 15 years. The height of our last cycle, let's say it was 14, 15, 16, and 17. 17 probably being the peak of the last cycle. And we put something in the market that we'd never done before, which was up to 60% of the housing we were putting in the market at the time was multifamily. Well, Portland had never done that before.
It's all single family.
It was largely biased towards single family. And during that same period of time, Portland became a destination for capital. I mean, we were one of the top 3-5 markets for outside investment capital.
You're saying 2017?
Yeah, 17. Let's call it 15 through 17. Yeah. Today, I think we're opportunity capital. We're dead last, I think. Right. So we've had a pretty extreme cycle in that respect. And so we put all this multifamily housing in the market and fill it up because we've got a lot of inbound net migration. And Portland, the city itself, still has some really good demographics from a housing consumption perspective. I think 30% of our population is 25 to 44 years old. So,
Right.
good housing consumption in Multnomah County specifically. Um, so, it's this long-term cycle. And then through COVID, we really artificially stimulated demand. We pulled a bunch of demand from the future into the present with artificially low interest rates. And so what you do is you have all these people who would have bought in 2 or 3 years, you have them buy today, you create a shortage. And the question really is, will the demand hold up over time, or are we sort of, um, I guess I would suggest that we may already be working through and solving some of the housing issues in the marketplace. If you look at, and we're this is a long answer, but we're also setting up probably the next cycle, because if you look at multifamily construction, we have the lowest permitting, I think, since the early 2000s for multifamily in 2024.
I know. Yeah, I always cite it. There's a 10-year low of apartment construction in Portland.
Yeah.
I know, but
Yep.
is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah. And so we're already sort of setting up that next cycle. Vacancy rates have started to fall. Time on the market started to fall. Rents are stabilizing. And so you can already see the beginning of that next cycle.
Sure.
And if you look inside of that, you can also see like a 3-bedroom rental. I mean, I think the vacancy rate's in the 2% range. You go up to, or down to studios, it's in the 7% range. So you can kind of see the type of housing we need. So yes, I don't mean to say there isn't a housing shortage, but the other thing I would say is today we just now recovered this month. We are back to pre-pandemic levels of inventory for sale in the market.
Okay.
So
Wow. Yeah.
it's kind of it's a dynamic situation, and I think that we're probably on our way to helping and solving some of those issues. But housing also isn't in relationship to, I guess that's always the question I ask too, is in relationship to what? In relationship to California, to Seattle?
Yeah. Well, I was literally just thinking, like, how does this rank nationwide? But also, no, I do think it's important that you bring that up, because it is like, it's hard to communicate that to people, that like people want this like snapshot of housing like right now, and it's like it is like this really long, like there's, like you said, like decades long like lag times involved, and you really have to see all these factors that are contributing. And I don't think people like thinking in those long term like windows.
Yeah.
But it's important. But yeah, how does that rank if you look nationwide? Are we kind of in a recovery, I guess, aspect? Are we in the middle of the pack? Are we in the bottom, the top? Like, how are we looking as a recovery?
In terms of housing velocity, transaction velocity, nowhere has recovered back necessarily to pre-pandemic levels, but pricing is certainly well above pre-pandemic levels. That's part of the issue, part of the problem. And I would suggest that we're probably at the beginning of another long-term cycle, in the same way that the Great Recession influenced housing for 10, 15 years. I do think that a cohort of people that now have a fixed rate on their mortgage below 4%.
Yeah, those people that locked in at
that is also
yeah.
going to have a really long-term impact on housing supply. Now, is there anything fundamentally wrong with the housing market because those people are locked in? I mean, I guess that's a good question. You could ask that question. And I guess the other question would be, who's defining what a appropriate or proper housing market is?
Right. Yeah.
According to who? If the answer is everyone who wants housing at a certain price can have it.
Yeah.
That is probably That's going to be probably difficult to achieve.
Yeah.
And I know there's some metrics, adjusted median income and or average median income and affordable this way or that way. And so then
Yeah, yeah.
it
It's a
also
good question though. Yeah, like what does success or whatever look like too,
yeah,
you know? Because
yeah.
there's a lot of people here in Portland who are just like on that hop on that train of housing's a human right. Everyone just deserves free housing. I don't really subscribe to that, but you just reminded me. I don't know if you saw because you were mentioning like there are metrics you can kind of gauge that on. Did you see
Yeah.
the lending tree study that this was like in May, but it came out on like KPTV and stuff, and it painted ours as worst in the nation, but their metrics were vacancy rates, housing unit approvals, home to value, income ratios, and I think those were their main three. But according to that, we were the worst. But it's interesting because it is like you're saying, you can kind of plug in different metrics to
Yeah.
get different
Yeah.
results. And
Well, and if you were to look at the state of Washington or California, you would find that debt to income ratios are higher in both of those states
Right.
than they are in Oregon. And interestingly enough, if you go to the state of Idaho, they're also higher there today than Oregon for completely different reasons. And
their debt to income,
uh-huh.
interesting.
Yeah. So for entirely different reasons. And Idaho is now experiencing what Oregon did, 15 through 17.
Sure, I know a lot of influx and
Large influx of people from out of town with a different income level that drive prices up, make it less affordable for individuals that were already there. This is sort of the story of Portland. We'll call it 2010 through 17. Lots of inbound net migration, people coming from different markets. They're selling in San Francisco, buying in Portland. And our advantage during that period of time was affordability. We were relatively more affordable.
especially to the Bay Area or something.
Yeah, and still are. I mean, if you're looking at San Diego or LA, or we are still a relatively more affordable place. Part of the issue is we've erased some of the high quality of life factors and tax advantages that we had. And so as you start to erase those things and pricing goes up, maybe you become a little bit less attractive. But I mean, there's two metrics maybe we would judge that by. One would be people that are already here and people that are moving here. And they're going to look at the market really, really differently. So I've always struggled a little bit to understand, well, how do we define success in housing? And staying on the bubble of the appropriate amount of supply is really hard to do with housing. Really hard to do. You generally are either oversupplied or undersupplied.
And either one is real bad, right? Like it's like you don't just want to have a bunch of inventory sitting there.
No, either one is not great, of course, and what you're trying to do, I think, is stay as close on top of that bubble as you can. But given the long lead times, the amount of capital it requires to bring new product to the market, that is a really difficult thing to achieve. And so I think we should always expect, given that, some sort of imbalance in the housing market.
Right.
And
it's not going to be what's the three bears, the perfect
Yeah.
bowl of porridge or whatever.
Yeah, we should expect some imbalance, and what we should wonder about is how tolerant are we to imbalance either way. And so today, let's just theoretically walk this out. What would we like today? We would like, and I'm driving to a point here. We would like housing to do what? Depreciate to a point where it's affordable for X percentage of the population, and we're willing to devalue that for the people that are already here. I'm just asking the question.
Yeah, there's trade-offs with all. Yeah.
Yeah. What are we trying to do? And if we did do that, would new construction come to the market? Could it afford to? And those are questions of, well, what exactly are we trying to achieve?
Yeah.
And how will we know when we've gotten there? And maybe that is defined somewhere, but I think we should have a tolerance to being on one side or the other of that bubble for periods of time.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, I think it is like, I don't know, people kind of jump on there's a huge problem bandwagon, or the opposite, and it is like I think having tolerance to that is important.
And the signal for fixing that is pricing.
Mm-hmm.
So high pricing is a signal that attracts supply and generally tends to mitigate the high pricing, and low pricing drives supply away and allows the existing stock to appreciate. And so pricing, I think, is the signal on either side. And we generally only really try to address the problem when pricing is too high.
Not the opposite.
Not the opposite. Now, certainly, I don't think our governments would want pricing to, fall through the floor. That affects their revenue streams and property taxes and other things. But I generally think that it becomes crisis level when it's too high. And all I'm suggesting is that perhaps those prices are signaling something, and if we allow them to work properly, they may bring us back onto the bubble. And we see that through the Great Recession. I mean, pricing, we had 20 to 30% devaluations because we flooded the market with supply, 6-7 million foreclosures nationwide. We essentially stopped building for about 3 years. The signal to builders was, the pricing signal was, don't bring new inventory to the market. There's plenty already here. Right. And then when we recovered, the pricing signal said, all right, it makes sense to come to the market. And it isn't really, the development community or really anybody else's fault that we drove interest rates to 2 or 2.5% and drove pricing up. That is not a problem of the market. The market didn't create that. Buyers and sellers didn't create that situation.
Yeah.
And it was the unintended consequence, I think, of a reaction to COVID. And I won't suggest whether the reaction was right or wrong, but we should recognize that that is an artificial stimulant to both supply and demand.
Right. Yeah, and you're talking about, because I remember very vividly, it was a weird time because when I was working in that era or a few years, so many like people in industries were struggling, and I was telling people like in lending, it was just like people were like drinking from the hose. Yeah. Is that's kind of what you're talking about? Like we were kind of artificially keeping that interest rate that low. Is that kind of what you're?
Yeah. So
nationally, I mean,
yeah. Interesting factoid. Prior to 2008, the Federal Reserve, our central bank, do you know how many mortgage-backed securities they owned?
I want to say it was a lot up until the crash, right? I mean,
it was zero.
Okay.
They owned none. The Federal Reserve did not purchase.
They don't participate in that market.
And put mortgage-backed securities on their balance sheet until 2008. And then they started.
Post 2008, it loaded up.
Post 2008, it was a new tool that they used. They buy mortgage-backed securities, and they can influence the mortgage market by being a consumer.
And that was just a signal to reinforce like the stability of the market.
It was, nobody else wants to buy them, so we will.
Right.
And in order to compel people to buy them, the rates would have to rise to a point that it may break the housing market or cause it not to function in theory. You fast forward to the height of COVID, and the Federal Reserve owned almost 30% of the entire mortgage market in the country. No one was.
You're just saying not MBS, but just the mortgage market.
MBS is what I'm talking about. Gotcha. Yeah, they're buying MBS. They're
backing those mortgages.
They are the buyer of those mortgages, and that is what drove interest rates down. There was a guaranteed buyer for them.
I see.
What you're seeing today are market-based rates. These are market-based consumers that have to buy MBS and put them in their portfolio. And that rate, the market is telling us, is 6.5% to 7%. Mm-hmm. And
that's kind of an they're not, it's like an unmeddled You're saying it's a purely market driven.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. The Federal Reserve is now deleveraging from mortgage-backed securities and drawing down their portfolio, so they are not a net consumer of mortgage-backed securities. My point in all of that is the Federal Reserve can act on long-term interest rates by becoming a net consumer or
Yeah. No, I totally get
or
it.
not.
And it's interesting because, yeah, they use that as a tool, almost like, what's the currency kind of way to control.
like buying treasuries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's got a
in the
tool to
open
regulate
market.
the
Yeah.
national rates. Or,
Yeah. And so, we drive the rates way down, stimulate demand during COVID and I guess my point is those were artificially low rates.
Right.
62% of people own homes in the country. 85% of them have a fixed rate below 5%.
Yeah.
And
which is, to me, that's unusual, right? It's like you're saying, this is like an unusual blip
sure.
in time in the market. Yeah.
Yeah. And nearly a quarter of all homeowners have a fixed rate below 3%. There is going to be a knock-on effect to that. That's not buyers' faults. It's not sellers' fault.
Right.
It's not the builder's fault.
They were just in the market.
It was the incentive we created in the marketplace, but those rates help to drive prices up to the place they are now.
Sure, yeah.
That's become the new pricing in the market. And I don't think anybody would be thrilled with a 20 or 30% devaluation in real estate. That's probably not on the table either.
Yeah, if you have property, you're not happy with that.
Yeah. And governments and municipalities wouldn't be happy with that either.
Right.
So
tax revenue and
so some of this is, and I suppose it doesn't really matter because what we do have is very high prices, and that's true. I mean, we've increased the median price of a home here by $130,000 or $140,000 since January of 20.
Mm-hmm.
And but I think understanding why matters. And
it is really important because I honestly don't think like there's so many layers to housing, but people, first of all, I don't think by and large don't understand that, like you said, the pricing where we're at now with pricing is directly due to this kind of, I don't know if you call it meddling, like at the national level to keep rates that low. They would argue during a turbulent time and all this stuff, but it's just important into context to understand like where we're at and everything. I think it's important.
Well, especially if you're going to try to apply fixes to it.
Right.
Understanding how we got here and then maybe some of the things you can and cannot change. And there is I think a growing concern that we should have about we are creating vulnerable cohorts of housing consumers. Those people that don't have a fixed rate, that have to participate today in the market at the really elevated levels that couldn't participate at the really low rates.
Sure, yeah.
And so you look inside of, housing burdened homes and you say, well, we have, 50 or 60% of housing burdened homes that aren't housing burdened at all. There's a tremendous deleveraging if you look at the amount of income that households were spending on housing during COVID. There's this huge deleveraging, which largely has allowed one part of the economy to weather inflation much, much better than the other part.
No, it's a good point because you keep mentioning too, all the people that are locked in at those rates, and it does tell you a lot about an overall population. Like there's like a segment that's, probably has a pretty decent mortgage rate or even rents, I guess, around that time, but then there's another population that doesn't have that, right? Is that kind of what you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my mortgage payment is less than my daughter's 2-bedroom apartment.
Wow. Yeah.
So, I'm bitching about the price of eggs, but I fixed this low rate mortgage and deleveraged my household in terms of debt service. Mm-hmm. And do I like the price of eggs? No, but it's different than somebody who's participating in market-based real-time housing plus the inflation that's coming from all of the other areas. There is a real vulnerable population that exists inside of I think the general consumer. And that is worth thinking about and being concerned about. And we have set up this very bifurcated marketplace when it comes to housing consumption. So I am not meaning to suggest that there is not a very vulnerable segment of the population that is needing to consume housing, and it's very, very hard. And this other segment of the population, that's fine. I got a fixed rate. Everything's good. I don't care. It's allowed the consumer to remain relatively strong and resilient.
Right. You can spend that money in other
You spend it in
ways.
you spend it in other ways. You consume. You can handle the price of eggs. You can, and that gap is probably growing, and should be something that we would be concerned with. And but I think it's just an illustration of certain segments of the housing market are completely fine.
Yeah.
Others are terribly vulnerable.
It is, like I said, yeah, it's a good point, because I think people, a lot of these stories and stuff, they paint it as like it's like a one size fits all thing. If it's just horrible, but it is. I forget that. Yeah, there's a huge segment of that market that got in during that 2020 time, and it's like, financially, it's a lot better for them. And why would you not, right? Like you said, you can save money on all these other areas. So,
and inflation has not impacted those households in the same way
as much, right?
that it has other households that are having to float with whatever the current level of inflation in the marketplace is.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And maybe that's a good transition to some of these questions I had, because I don't know, sometimes I wonder, like, even as anti-regulation as I am on a local level for housing, I wonder sometimes, like, how much either way things can really move the needle. But that's why, like, I had a bunch of questions here. I guess just in general, like, are you generally, do you like have that view of just like, we probably shouldn't be overly, burdensome on the housing market with regulations? Are you concerned with that stuff, or do you just more look at the bigger forces like we were just talking about?
No. I think when it comes down to, then you start drilling down to localities, we should be very concerned with the disparity that whatever state and local regulations are adding on to housing affordability. Yeah. So if you look at the Portland metro area versus, we'll call it Phoenix, Houston,
sure,
just as an example. And there's a lot of differences between the two markets.
Yeah, I know people bring it up a lot, and they're always like, well, they're kind of zoning is different, and there's a lot of sprawl. But it's a good example, because it's like what you can do is.
And their geography is different. I acknowledge that. Yeah. We're constrained by geography, and building is expensive in a place where there's lots of hills versus very flat. So, but from a regulatory standpoint, the burden here is 4x what it is in Houston.
Sure.
So let's say that regulation, I think the number adds about 26% to the cost of housing, single family housing here in the metro area.
So if you had a $500,000 home, that's a couple $100,000.
It's like $104,000. Wow. Yeah. I think 93,000 is the average that it's adding. And so it does have an influence, and and you can choose to manage your housing either way. What you can say is Houston has relatively cheap and abundant housing. Yeah, it's flat. Yeah, there's a Minute Mart next to your, I get it. There's some trade-offs. There's no question about that. And Portland has the opposite, maybe. It's highly regulated and has an urban growth boundary and has a lot of overlays and fees. And so you can pick, but what you can't say is, well, we want Houston pricing with Portland regulation.
It just doesn't work.
It's a series of trade-offs and finding the balance. And there's room to say, I don't want Houston style housing. That's fine. There's no problem with that. Just don't want Houston style pricing then.
Okay. Yeah.
We get to pick.
Right.
But we can't have everything. And we should be, I think, intellectually honest about, hey, some of our choices are going to keep housing more expensive here.
Yeah.
But we think the trade-offs for that are worth it. And they're these series of things. That would be at least intellectually honest.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems fair to me that if you're aware enough to make that trade-off and understand the implications of both. Yeah.
I'm sort of a crazy market-based person, though. So I Only because I think the market understands itself better and can respond faster to inputs than regulation
Sure,
can.
sure, yeah.
And it's maybe a little bit messier, but I just trust the market more.
Yeah. It's a kind of a
And
natural regulator.
yeah, yeah, and I think prices are a miraculous signal in the economy that tell us um, that signal to both consumers and producers what they should be doing.
Yeah. Because like you said earlier, it's pricing such a big indicator of supply.
Right, right, yeah.
Just for as one thing.
Yeah. And if you look at multifamily as a for instance, I mean, it would be very instructional for everyone, and not that they have the time for this or the inclination for it, but to understand how a multifamily building is valued
Sure.
and what that means for how it can be financed and how it can be brought to the market. And it's probably the best illustration. It's a little bit cleaner illustration than single family housing as a for instance. Um, and then to understand the risk and the timeline that suppliers have to commit to bring product to the marketplace. We talk a lot about affordable housing and building, and new
Right.
construction is so expensive. No one talks about since mid 2022, builders have been subsidizing purchases through interest rate buy downs and concessions, giving huge parts of their otherwise would be profit back to consumers to make their product affordable. They can't build it more affordably. They can't get around the $93,000 worth of regulation.
Right.
The
I've heard a lot. Yeah, those margins are like razor thin anyway. So you're saying they're kind of putting in more than they're putting in more to the community than they probably should be
they
as a business.
they have had to offset the to make their product approachable. I think it's as much as 80% of all new construction has a interest rate buy down or some sort of concession attached to it.
Okay.
And we talk very little about this, where I think that if the option was for builders to simply bring product to the market at a lower price, they may or may not do that, but understand from their perspective, they also need to build a product that is in line with market pricing. And the input costs sort of dictate what that is. And now they're subsidizing interest rate for payment as well. No one talks about that. I mean, they have had to work hard to make their product affordable in this marketplace.
I see.
And yeah, the margins, I think on average for national builders are 9% net margins.
Okay.
Some are
I've
higher,
actually
some are
didn't-
lower.
Never heard that though. That is interesting. So they're subsidizing to purchase those buy downs. So yeah, for multifamily, like large
No,
just
for single family.
single family. Okay.
So if you look at the large home builders, and you can look in their financials, and they'll disclose most of the larger ones, D.R. Horton, Lennar,
Sure.
some of those guys, Pulte, they will disclose what they're having to use as concessions to buy down interest rates. And so they've found a way to help make their product more affordable, even though the prices have risen on a payment level. And that comes out of their profit margin. And some people would say, oh, they just build it into the price or whatever. But if the market supports the price, they are giving profit margin away in order to stimulate the market and make it so that consumers can approach their product. And so there's a lot of complexity inside of what consumers and producers are willing to do to make a deal. And I just think they're best suited to do that on their own.
Yeah. Sort of make an appealing thing to a consumer, I guess. Yeah. Like
Yeah.
make it affordable in that way.
Yeah. And a builder doesn't, no builder builds their homes to sit on them.
Right.
They build
It's
them.
an expensive endeavor.
They
yeah.
build them to sell.
Yeah.
They are motivated to meet the market where it's at and run a responsible company and put product in the market at a price point that makes sense. But they're not wanting to sit on their inventory.
Yeah. And I was just curious, like, what do you feel about, because there's so much talk up here all the time with even a lot of my guests about multifamily, like large apartment construction. Like, what is that outlook, and like, what are the challenges with that? Like, it seems like, because like I said earlier, I've mentioned a lot, there's this 10-year low in Portland. And is that just the institutional scare away from Portland of like, this may not pay off as an investment? Or
It's a number of things, but I mean, essentially, it's just very hard to bring multifamily. I would say almost impossible today in the city to start a multifamily project that makes sense. The amount, you would back into it
it
with
just doesn't pencil.
it doesn't pencil.
Yeah.
You just cannot make it work, and the rates that you would have to charge to make new product work in this marketplace are well above what the rates that are being
Yeah.
charged in the market
It's
are.
unreasonable to expect people to pay that.
Yeah. And so then you're not going to get it financed. And there just isn't a real positive pathway right now. And I'm not saying that some people aren't doing it, but at scale, there's not a really positive pathway to bring multifamily in a responsible way to the marketplace. And you couple that with Portland is not seen as a good institutional investment.
Right.
From an opportunity capital perspective, there are a lot of other markets that you're going to choose before you put money into the city.
Yeah, it's funny. I had a clip, maybe I'll put it in here, earlier this year of like not city councilors, but some people working for the city finally like saying that.
Large institutional investors did leave Portland in droves in 2020, driven by reputational issues, driven by other factors. Part of our job is to figure out how to get them back.
They're like, because they have graphs about their permit drops and all this stuff, and they were just saying like, yeah, like large institutional investment just is not coming here. There's
Right.
And I've been saying this for a long time. Like there's, like you said, there's way better options if you have that kind of money and you want to invest. There's better cities to go to, you know,
and nobody has to invest here. You need to want to. And we should look, I think, really hard at the 15, 16, 17 peak cycle,
right,
and ask ourselves the question, why were we in the top 5 metros in the country for outside investment capital flowing into? We became a destination capital city. Why? And what's changed?
Mm-hmm.
Those are 2 near time periods that we could ask ourselves that question.
Yeah, I think it's the same with the crane count. Like, and I know it could be housing or commercial, but our crane count at that time was also kind of peaked at that point.
Yeah. And yes, COVID had something to do with that, work from home. I mean, all of those things are contributing to many of the issues that a lot of downtown cores are dealing with. But let's not kid ourselves that we have not done ourselves any favors during that period of time. Yes, every other metro has had to deal with the same things, and we've just done a good job at making it even harder.
Right. Yeah, because I know that I'll pull, if I can find some, I'll pull it. But I know I've heard at least a couple that like, yeah, Portland is lagging as far as a downtown recovery. And I know that's specifically looking at downtown, but it is just interesting because so many urban cores have faced that same issue post-COVID. And Portland's just unique. We're kind of an outlier in that sense of like, why is it that we're...
Yeah. Well, I suppose that we don't really need to mince words about it. Portland's quality of life, especially in the core of the city, has declined materially during that period of time. And we've not recovered. And we took it upon ourselves to also make Multnomah County the highest tax burden in the country outside of Manhattan.
Yeah. Second
second,
New York.
Second only to New York.
Yeah.
And we now have the greatest contiguous county disparity in the country between Clark County and Multnomah County from a tax perspective. So people respond to...
Is that right? I've never heard that. That's,
yep.
And it makes sense because people move up there all the time.
Yeah, people respond to incentive, and they're self-interested, and they'll say, hey, this makes sense for me to...
Because I like, even one of my sisters moved up there, but I just didn't know that was that's, would you say the top?
It's the top disparity between contiguous counties. We have this unique situation where you've got a state and a state.
Just across the river.
Just across the river. So... there's an incentive there. And I think that's been a part of the story of, and I'm talking contiguous counties. So there may be other counties that are not contiguous where the disparity is greater, but it's unique.
These are right next to each other.
They're right next to each other.
And also, like you said, a state, because, there's no state income tax.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other incentives.
So you move up there, no state income tax. You blaze into Oregon, you shop, no sales tax.
Right.
I mean, it's, people are clever about making that work. But um, you know, uh, we've it seems squandered a tremendous amount of momentum and natural advantage that we had coming into that,
Right.
that 15, 16, 17 cycle. Um, and all of the, many of the same advantages exist. Portland's a beautiful city. It's positioned almost perfectly from a geographical perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many really, really wonderful things about it. And I think it's why it's frustrating to see it struggle.
Yeah.
It's tremendously frustrating to watch it struggle.
Well, I would agree. Yeah, it is like I squandered, because that's exactly the time that I always point to people is right about 2017 before you see this deterioration. And yeah, it is just really interesting. I talk a lot about how, the Vancouver waterfront has just been booming for the past few years. And it's just so interesting because it is like contiguous or just right there. It's literally just a couple miles away. And
Yeah.
that's all it takes, that little incentive change. And
Yeah.
that's all it takes for a
Yeah.
little investment, but it's interesting.
Yeah, and it takes individuals being willing to commit capital, trusting the government and the stability of the government and their partnership, and it takes a lot of those things. And it's like anything. Reputation is built slowly over a long period of time and destroyed quickly.
And I always say, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but I always say that Portland has an anti-build reputation. Would you say that's accurate right now?
Anti-build.
Yeah, like I guess specifically with like permitting starts and that kind of thing. They're trying to line all these incentives up now to change that, but it just seems like whether it's institutional investment for commercial or even residential sometimes, although I think like I'm a supporter of a lot of these, the SDC waiver and some of these things.
Yeah.
But I think that for the period we're talking about, post 2017 to up about now, it seems like there was an don't build here reputation is what I always say. But
Yeah. That might be true.
if you have other alternatives, like other places to.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That might be true. It goes back to that sort of question of, well, what do you want? You can't have everything.
Right.
So what trade-offs are you willing to make? And just be clear-eyed about those trade-offs. We don't want building, but we want affordable housing. Well, you kind of can't have those two things if you have a growing population. Do you want a growing population too? Yes, we also want that.
Right.
Okay, do you want more jobs? Yes. Do you want increasing wages? Well, yeah, we want all of that.
Yeah.
But we want housing to stay affordable, and we don't want to build.
Yeah.
And I think Portland also thought probably that they could really beat the horse a lot harder than the horse was really willing to take.
Went past that
Yeah.
line. Yeah.
Like you're going to be here forever. And,
We'll see how many taxes we can.
yeah.
on
And now
here.
we're finding that point of capitulation where both individuals and business are saying, no, we're not.
They just say no thanks. Yeah.
We're not. And we're not because, well, I think it could be for a number of reasons, but much of the appeal and allure of the city has also diminished.
Yeah.
And
There's a stigma.
So you don't have, but we want to keep taxing and regulating and
It's kind of like, for what if there's no
right.
that appeal's
Yeah.
gone,
And I think we're finding that point of capitulation. I mean, we're past that point.
Yeah.
Certainly. We're probably 12 to 18 months past that.
When it's one of the reasons like I've given props to the governor and everything, because it's just like usually from a governor like that you wouldn't see all these kind of reversals. And it's funny because I always kind of say, like, I support, she pushed this SDC recommendation to the city and this goal of 5,000 units and all this stuff, and and rolling back some of their own regulations. But I always say, like, it's just weird because they kind of set up these regulations.
Yeah.
But at least it's an awareness that there's a problem that we can use tools to kind
I
of.
think that's a positive, but it's like some other things we've done. I mean, I think Measure 110 was similar.
Yeah.
It's
Oh, yeah.
like, ooh, that didn't work. Let's roll that back. It didn't produce what we wanted.
And you become kind of a national target of, like, look at this failed experiment and
Right.
didn't work. And,
But to lure back construction, I think I agree with the SDC waivers. I think those are a positive signal. I agree with some of the middle housing and zoning changes that the city's done. I think those are positive approaches to try to get more units in. I think there's some question about how well they're working, but I do think they're a positive sign from the government. I think maybe we're going to find that while that's a good start, capital may be a little shyer than that. They may need a little more incentive than that, and they may need to feel some confidence beyond what we're doing today.
Because even with that, that might be kind of like table stakes for a lot of
Yeah.
investors, right?
Yeah.
It's like we could still go over here where there's other incentives and
Right.
other stuff. And
Right. And you have to start looking, I mean, they are going to look at the leading edge of demand as well. And that is a growing population and a growing workforce. And Multnomah County is not growing
Right.
at the moment. They're losing population. And we are underpacing as a metro job growth the nation. So our job growth is maybe 0.3%, and the nation is a 1 1/8.
yeah.
And so we've kind of, we used to outperform. Now we've lagged behind. This is part of the cycle, but I think it'll take, the people that are in office and approaching these problems, they've got some work to do. And I think there's a lot of positive things going on. There's SDC waivers, middle housing. I mean, there are housing specifically, but they're also going to need to eventually, likely address the tax issue and the tax
Yeah.
burden. I mean,
Yeah. No, it is a, I'm glad, I'm a big fan of Dan Ryan. He's one of the only city councilors here who's like, not only is our tax base kind of left the area, but the reason is because they feel so tax burdened and they're not getting the services reflected, which I think a lot of people feel that. And I think you touched on an interesting thing too, that a lot of people now are finally getting. There's a bunch of big stories this month about, well, and we got a good one, but about how, huge companies are leaving, like Dutch Brothers, just officially left in the town that I grew up in, Grants Pass. But like I think Tektronix, there's a bunch of others that are like just surprisingly, they're like, and it's for the reasons we were talking about. It's like they don't have to stay here. It's a lot more. It pencils out a lot better than other places, and I think the state, thankfully, is probably realizing that finally and understanding that the amount of taxes we pull in is not going to be good with all these, departures.
I read that article and I mean, I think, the state it should be concerned. And, the right, I mean, there should be a good tension between, government and the private sector. And I think we've probably just gone too far.
Just a little bit, yeah.
And it kind of goes back to that conversation of, well, people aren't going to leave. And now we're finding, well, that's not true.
Right.
They will. And businesses, good businesses that we don't want them to leave. We want them to stay here. Organ businesses.
Right.
We don't want them to go.
Yeah. And it's a bit, for me, I'm really waiting to see, like, the MLB thing's a longer thing. They just passed this thing in the legislature to pump all this money to try to attract an MLB team here. But also, like, if the Blazers do end up leaving, that's another. Both of those things I'm watching as a kind of sign of big institutional investment. Because especially with, national sports league like that, it's like that you really start to look at cities as a whole and like, what's the best option here? Like, what's the best ecosystem for this to be sustainable and be profitable? And
Total opinion piece now. I'm just I'm just editorializing. But I felt very much that the MLB thing was such a. I felt it was just very tone deaf.
Yeah, I did too. I don't really agree with.
It was like
I think you just pile a bunch of money and say like, come over here. Like it just doesn't make sense to me.
And the
because again, it's more tax burden for people.
Well, and if you look at how they were intending to fund it, and some of the ways that they intended to, a huge portion of it was player tax.
Right.
And
so they take a piece of each player's revenue or income.
Yeah. And I just think it was very tone deaf. I think it was a little bit like, it's like, well, clean up your issues first
Right,
before
right.
you start inviting someone to invest $2 billion.
Yeah.
It's almost like, this is how it felt to me, is it felt a little bit like, well, we haven't done anything, but here's a bunch of money.
Right.
Does that offset the fact that we haven't done anything else yet?
Right.
And it's like,
To make something like a home for potentially forever.
Yes.
There's a lot more
Yeah.
demands there that have to be.
and as a consumer and a taxpayer, you look at it and you say, well, and this might be simplistic, but it is probably the feeling is, well, can't you address some of these other issues first?
Mm-hmm.
How about the roads?
Yeah.
How about some of these things that we deal with every day? And I think Oregonians and Portlanders in general have shown themselves to be generous, compassionate people.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that they aren't willing to spend money on the problem.
Yeah. I always say like there's almost like not a tax that people wouldn't approve,
Yes, they're like, yes, we want to address and fix these problems, and we are willing. We aren't just saying this is what we want. We're willing to vote these taxes on ourselves to fix them. And I think it would be very different if we had a high tax burden, a functioning, pristine city.
Right. And that's, yeah. It's like I said earlier, it's just people, they'll happily pay into that, but they have to get the services,
Right.
and they're not feeling that. They just don't.
And they've proven themselves willing to do that. So I think the taxpayer is somewhat frustrated. They're saying, we've been willing to do our part. Now we want you to do
Right.
your part. And it just seemed tone deaf to me to be like, we'll incentivize a MLB team to come here and
Right.
spend $2 billion. And the embarrassing part for Portland is, and maybe I'm wrong, I hope I am wrong, and that would be wonderful, but it seems like the likely outcome of that will be we offer and no one has interest.
That's what I just don't, it almost, maybe I'm wrong about this too, but it almost seems like kind of desperate of like,
Yeah.
just look past all these other issues. We got a pile of money here.
Yeah.
And the player charge thing is just kind of weird. I don't know if that's a common thing for building a team. It just seems like that would also detract potential people
Yeah.
from.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
I don't either.
know that much about baseball either. So
No,
I'm
but
an NFL guy.
but if it was here, I would go.
yeah, me too.
I mean, I admit it.
For sure, it'd be
So,
fun.
it'd be great.
And
And
brand new facility, and it's supposed to be right by the river and all that stuff.
And it would be wonderful if Portland can get to a place where it can attract that type of
Sure.
investment and entertainment venue. I think that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
It just seems like we've missed some steps.
It's a little, yeah. I would totally agree. It just seems a little unrealistic at this point.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go through some of these local things real quick. You already kind of said you support the SDC waiver stuff. Do you have any more thoughts about that? And how,
No, I think anything that the government can do to incentivize housing on their part at a more affordable level is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think it should invite a conversation about a longer term thought about these charges in general.
sure, yeah.
And if it's a short term thing, what happens when it goes away? And so I think it should invite a broader conversation. We'll see if I think it's a good start. We'll see if it stimulates
Yeah.
any development. But and I'll leave it at this, but the producers are also going to forecast demand. And you could drop all charges, and if they don't believe there's going to be demand, they won't bring supply to the market. So
Interesting, okay.
it's going to be a two-sided
Yeah.
equation.
Okay. Yeah, I know that as it just passed the one of the committees, they were talking just about that stuff too. Of like, hey, basically, if it gets to the 5,000 unit goal, we'll probably extend it again. And some of the criticisms are like, obviously we won't have money for a lot of the stuff they just debated in the city budget for parks or all this other stuff. But some of the arguments against that are like, look, this infrastructure is here. The type of stuff SDCs are normally used for is like a new development and a new neighborhood,
Right.
which isn't really the stuff that we're talking about all the time. But
Yeah, but yes, I think it's a great
yeah,
it's a great start, and it signals we want development, we want
right.
building. That's a good. I think that's
It's
a
a
good signal.
welcoming thing.
Yep.
Yeah, I have heard from like I had an architect on here once, and some of the other housing people said that it was a good first step, but they would like to see the design review process totally overhauled. And I don't know exactly what that means, but it's a lot of the
there's
permitting for
there's
other-
two things I think that a builder cares about, or a producer cares about, and one is time
timeline. Yeah, that's what I've heard is time is money, and
and certainty of time.
yeah.
And knowing that they can bring their product to the market at a certain place and time. And the more certainty that can be built into that process, the more confident they're going to be. And
So you don't have this erroneous time where like things are just sitting idle.
yeah, and to a producer, to those builders, those construction companies, 3 months is a big deal.
Right.
It's a big
You're kind of
deal.
just burning money sometimes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah, I was going to also get your thoughts on maybe I'll put some graphics out here, but the social housing study that was approved. And I was just going to say, I said this on my last episode, but I've heard from people that these studies that go through city council almost always, it's the same pattern of it goes to Eco Northwest or some agency and kind of tells them the result that they want to hear. And it's kind of just a pipeline to policy, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on it. They want to do this. Before they started this conversation, they kicked it off by comparing it to, I think it was Austria or something, Vienna, which I just immediately, when I saw that, I'm like, okay, I'm not on board, because we can't start comparing to like a European country with totally different government and all this stuff. But I'm just curious, yeah, your thoughts on like, is that a worthy investment of time? A lot of people I've talked to just say that sounds like housing projects, which were kind of seen as a failure.
Yeah. Well, I think any government policy towards either directly regulating pricing or becoming the supplier for housing,
a landlord, basically,
is very problematic for one reason, and that is it will never solve the market-wide problem. So let's pretend that we did bring. We're going to call it euphemistically now social housing. Let's say we bring that to the table. Mm-hmm. And for however many people get into that housing, it probably will help those people. In the same way that no one can argue that rent control doesn't help the people living in rent controlled units.
It's going to serve some people.
It will serve a tiny fraction of the population and have almost no impact on the overall problem. So we will spend lots of money, and we will talk about it, and we will put it into the marketplace, and we will not solve the problem. So I don't even know that we need to address the anything other than that. It's not going to solve the market-wide problem. You'll help a few people, that's true, and maybe that's admirable. But just like rent control, I wrote my master's thesis on rent control.
Oh,
so
really? Well, yeah, I talk about it on here a lot too, because like we said before we recorded, like we are one of the few states that has at a state level. And I think it's funny because I hear a lot of local people here, even at a city or county level, float these like further rent control. And I don't think they know that the state already has a.
Yeah. Well, that is sort of that's always the danger of, we're going to put rent control in, but it's going to be at this level and at the state. And then it's like, yeah, we're going to ratchet it down and let everybody else do. Yeah. And I think, again, back to the instinct is right to, we want to help people. There's a vulnerable population. We want to help them. And again, for those people that actually make it into that type of housing, it probably will help them. Is that enough for the cost and the burden to the market overall, and what you're telling the rest of the market in terms of supply? I mean, the only long-term solution, in my view, to demand is supply.
Right.
And if we remove, in my view, the obstacles to enough supply, trust me, builders want to build. Mm-hmm.
They'll do it
if
you make it appealing.
Yeah. And we cannot, just like Idaho cannot right now, we cannot regulate our market in real time when you are bringing in large populations of people with different income sets than the existing population. And those things take time to work through. And so it's not unique necessarily to, the West Coast is very expensive. But migration also matters. You can't regulate that in real time.
Yeah.
And I think price controls are a really, really bad idea.
Yeah. It's kind of like you're saying, like it's going to serve arguably a small number of people, but it's just not the best way to. It's not going to solve anything in the long term.
It won't solve the market problem.
Yeah.
So we'll feel better about the few people we helped, and I'm not discounting that.
Right.
But it won't solve the overall
You're
problem.
going to have this large percentage of the rest of the market that's just kind of like unhelped by that.
And that's how you end up with, I mean, you look at some of the other places, and maybe the approach is going to be different here. I don't really know. I would agree with you. It's probably not a good idea to compare it to a city in Austria.
Yeah.
And
where their taxes are like 50% or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure that's a good idea, but it's rent control, these other things, you create all these perverse incentives. It's how you end up with people that live in a rent controlled apartment in Manhattan for 42 years.
Right.
And their rent's $800.
Mm-hmm.
And
oftentimes, I don't know, just at least from what I've heard over my life, is like they're often like horrible living conditions. Like they don't maintain the properties, and it just doesn't seem like good for anybody. But
well, the incentives go to the landlord. Has no incentive to maintain the property because no money they put into the property can they get back out of it.
Right.
And you won't build rent controlled units because your costs are going to escalate, but your rent cannot. And I know there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of different types of rent control, and there are strong controls and soft controls, and there are lots of different controls, none of which, just in my view, are going to be as efficient as allowing the market to work. And I know the instinct of government is to meddle, but maybe in this case it would be avoid that instinct
Yeah.
and try not to and allow the market to work out. And that may appear a little bit messier in the short term, but I think it'll produce a better result in the long term.
Okay. Yeah, another thing, I mean, I always hear is that like even the affordable housing that even like the city and the county have done already is like, I'm exaggerating, but it's like $1 million a square foot. It's like a crazy,
Very expensive. housing.
somehow it gets to these bloated costs to the point where it's just like completely does not pencil out. And also, I mean, this is kind of getting into more like long-term housing for some of the homelessness issues that we have, but a lot of those properties can't get insurance now because of all the issues involved, like fires and stuff. And so it just seems like the affordable housing thing is just, it gets brought up a lot, but it's so problematic.
I don't think the government can solve that problem.
Right. That's
All
a
they can-
private
All
industry.
they can do is incentivize it.
Yeah.
But they cannot directly solve it.
And if they, and it seems like if they try to, it's just like enormously expensive. And
Yeah, their housing is going to be 3 or 4x more expensive.
right.
And everybody says, "Oh, we've solved the problem." No, you've passed the burden on to the taxpayer. That's all you've really done.
Yeah.
And again, just be upfront about that. We're going to build 50,000 units that are affordable, defined by however we define that. And because the market doesn't actually support that, we're going to pass that cost on to the taxpayer.
Right.
Is everybody okay with that?
It's all subsidized.
Yeah, just be realistic about it.
Okay. Similar type of thing with the rent AI pricing ban. I wrote on here, I call it anti-housing, but I just, I keep talking about the 10-year low in apartment construction. I just see stuff like that, and I've been posting about it all the time this year. If something like that passes at a city level in Portland, it's just another signal to investors of like,
Yeah.
no thanks, I could do
Yeah.
this in a different city because. But it's just, it's kind of like we were talking about rent control a second ago. It's kind of similar.
Yeah, I think that in theory, the idea there is to, and I'm not 100% certain on this, but the idea is to provide less asymmetry in pricing between landlords and tenants, and not have it, be adjusting in real time. And I think we talked about, okay, we're going to ban AI pricing because we think it's going to drive the cost up. But there is another side to that is, well, what about when demand is low and it drives the cost down?
Right.
So there's two sides of it.
Well, one thing was interesting to me about this, the way that this measure was written specifically was like, and I've talked to developers in Portland who are like, it literally, the way the thing's written would not allow you to do comps. Like you could not.
Oh.
And I'm just like, how does that in any housing market make sense if you can't compare to your neighborhood? Like it just doesn't seem
Well, how are you supposed to
realistic.
price? Yeah. How are you supposed to price?
I don't know
them?
where it's getting the prices from, but
Yeah, and I guess my question would be, how are they supposed to price then?
yeah.
And I mean, that gets into a much larger conversation around valuation of multifamily properties and whether building is sustainable. They have to be able to price a certain way. It seems
It actually in Berkeley they got the city got sued there because they said that was anti-free speech. Like they were looking at you literally if you can't like look at your neighbors' homes and compare the values, like that does seem like a
it's certainly
expression.
Yeah. And here's the thing that'll happen is we'll go back to where we started this conversation. Then supply will simply leave.
Right, right.
And as a city, you're left with what? We banned all of these things and we still have no supply. Okay, now we're going to be the supply. And we just had a conversation about where that will go. It's like, no, there's got to be a better balance between those who create the supply and the government that regulates it.
Yeah.
Because those people don't have to be here.
Yeah, and especially like, just the environment that we're in here in Portland is like you don't need that tension between the two. You don't want that tension.
No.
Like you need to be welcoming and like
Nope.
So that was kind of, let me see here. Oh yeah, I was just going to ask you about the vacancy fee thing. That was another study that's going through the process of, and it seems like I see it popping up around cities around the country to try to kind of combat the downtown shell core thing of like, we have, I see it as more of like a commercial thing, I guess, because there's a lot of commercial vacancy. But what are your thoughts on that? Like, is that effective?
I think it's a terrible idea. I think nothing could be, in my view, and maybe there's a part of it I don't understand, but as I understand it, in my view, it's a slap in the face to already struggling
somebody trying to rent a
developers. And trust me, there is a fee for vacant space. They pay it every month because there's no income. The government piling onto that is offensive. And
I actually never thought about it that way. That is, they're already paying regardless.
Yes. Yeah. And prices will adjust. And you also then, there are certain places that regardless of the price, there is no buyer. The Florida condo market is a good example of that right now with the regulatory changes there after the collapse of the tower.
Right, the one that they made all these new regulations for like structural integrity.
Correct, and reserves, and I'm not even arguing whether it's the right or the wrong thing to do.
I just see the effect of
my point was there are condos that cannot be given away there.
Right.
So if there's no market for your space, and let's bring it back to Portland, if there's no market for your downtown commercial space, but you're going to be charged for leaving it vacant, at what level? I mean, it may actually cost you more to drop your rents to a point where someone would come in, and then to administer and manage that may cost you more than actually just leaving it vacant.
Sure.
And there's a lot of complexities depending on who owns it and how their financials work, but it seems very offensive to me to tell struggling inner city landlords, specifically of the commercial type, we're now going to charge you for leaving your space vacant.
Right.
I mean,
it's like the tension thing we were just talking. It's like we don't need that.
There almost couldn't be a better way of saying get the hell out.
Right. Like, by the way, I know you're struggling, but we're going to charge you as well. It's just like doesn't really
things are tough. Let me just put my finger on the scale here. And I agree with you. That's not what we need. We need cooperation,
work together,
and to work together. We don't need that tension here.
Oh, okay. Let me see what else I got here. We kind of talked about a lot of this stuff. I was thinking a second ago, like, do you have any thoughts? A lot of people had comments about the Wall Street Journal did the huge story on the Big Pink, the tower, and it's kind of like we were just talking about with commercial vacancy, but it's just such a symbol of, it's one of the most prominent things on our skyline, and now it just seems like it's just dirt cheap. And
so was the Ritz, so was
the Ritz,
Montgomery Park. Yeah. I mean, those I think are much better representations of the real repricing that is going on in the city
as a post-COVID,
as sort of a post-COVID. I mean, this is the implied demand.
Yeah.
We can see it in real time, and excuse me. We can say whatever we want, but in real time, you can't argue with what the marketplace is telling you these properties are worth. But it goes back to demand. Nobody wants the space.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do? And the owner of that space, let's think about their thinking and their decisioning. The owner of that space has decided it is better to take a massive loss on divesting out of Portland
Right.
than wait for it to recover.
That's a more profitable approach.
Think about that, though. They're looking ahead and saying, we don't see a time at which this investment can be made profitable. Let's take our loss now.
Yeah.
That's not a positive, and those people are acting entirely in their own self-interest and making that decision based on their assessment of the future prospects of the city. That is not good.
Yeah.
And we would want them to say, even if the city was kind of going through a period, we would want them certainly to say, yes, but we see a pathway to recovery. And so we think this is a great long-term investment that's going to pay off for us, and we want to hold.
Right.
And that probably is the most, disappointing and worrying thing about some of these projects that have. Now, there was a buyer for Montgomery Park, and so that's good, but at a significant discount. And you look at, high-profile properties like the Lloyd Center Mall that sat undeveloped, and the unspoken implication of that is we don't see value.
Yeah.
And, Big Pink's probably just, unfortunately, the most significant
Symbolic of that.
representation.
Well, the Ritz is interesting. I've talked about it on other podcasts of like, that seems like that's the worst, one of the worst as far as timing. Cause like we were saying, that was kind of
couldn't have
started in the
couldn't have been
2017
worse.
time. And then, kind of was probably on pause, I think, for a little bit around COVID, but and now it's just like kind of a joke.
It could not have been worse.
Yeah.
I feel
I think it's upside down now.
I feel for everyone who's involved in it, because their investment at the time was the right one.
Right.
It was a project that all of us that are around here were proud of. We were
You're like, this will put Portland on the map.
We were excited that it was coming here, and it was but the timing was just
couldn't
really,
have been worse.
Couldn't have been worse. But
Yeah.
that goes back to the illustration of what was going on then that isn't going on now,
Right.
and what can the city and counties do to fix that issue.
Yeah.
And get back to a place where there is, and I think it's sort of some of the small fundamental issues. It's, and I know, people probably get sick of hearing this, but it's tiny things: safety, cleanliness, just basic things. We've got to go back to, on the hierarchy of needs, Portland isn't at self-actualization. It's at food and shelter.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I was joking on another podcast of like, maybe we need it like 4 seasons, but it is true. It's because it's just like,
But we're probably getting one.
there's too much like the blight issue is just too, it's just, it doesn't line up with a 4 seasons or a Ritz or, something like that.
Yeah.
And I would say same with MLB, like we were talking earlier. It's just like, if you get, clean up the blight and some of the issues, chronic issues that we have, then maybe you'll have this appeal. But it's just, people aren't going to ignore.
Be
ears.
self-aware. Deal with the fundamentals. Deal with the things that aren't
Livability.
deal with the things that aren't as fun as talking about an MLB team that
Right.
isn't coming.
Yeah.
Deal with the really fundamental working issues of the city
Day-to-day
first.
stuff. Yeah.
And I think that would signal, all right, the city's serious,
Yeah.
and decide who it is that we want to be. And I think there was, I'll leave it at that.
All right.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to say about that stuff before? I was just going to ask your Northwest story, like did you grow up here? Did you move here?
So no, I think we've talked enough about housing. Please, let's talk about something else. So came out here when I was I don't know, maybe 6, 7, 8 or so with my family. Moved from Ohio.
Okay.
So I'm from Ohio, the Dayton, Xenia area of Ohio. Came out here and have lived here ever since. I'm one of 9 children.
Oh, wow.
And so
Are you, where are you in the age?
I'm 4th.
Okay.
Out of the
Right in
9.
the middle.
Yeah, right in the middle. And so, I grew up here and and I love it here. I love everything about the Northwest, and it's hard to see some of the struggles because of that, because
Yeah.
I love it so much. And but every time you leave and you come back, it's a really special place.
Yeah. You see
So
the uniqueness of it. And
yeah,
it's one thing that I always kind of, I don't know, it comes up a lot in the show of like people that have, because I've lived here almost 20 years and I'm an Oregonian. I grew up in Southern Oregon, but people that have moved here, there's a lot of people I talk to who moved here post 2020. And I think to them, a lot of these issues, they're just like, it's just kind of embedded to them. Like they don't really care. But then the people that have lived here a lot longer, they just have seen that transition. And it's way more important to them to be like, they've had this image of the city that they know existed at one point.
and I think I think that's really well said. We know the potential and of the city, and we know what Portland looks like at its best, and it's a phenomenal place.
Yeah.
And so you're right that it is probably harder for some of us who've been here a longer time. It's like, no, it can be a lot better.
Right. Yeah.
There's a lot of upside, and Portland's there's still a lot of really wonderful things about it.
Yeah.
But it's, there is a huge amount of upside that those of us that have been here a while are like, no, it can be even
You
better.
see that potential for
Yep.
sure. Okay, let me get into some of these goofy questions here.
All right.
Let's start with the classic. Do you like crunchy or smooth peanut butter? Maybe you don't like peanut butter.
I do like peanut butter. And I'm probably more of a smoothie,
Okay.
but I also really like some of these other butters, the almond butters and
Yeah.
the cashew butters and
There's a lot of them now. Yeah.
now they've got them with like cardamom in them and stuff. And but no, I can get on board with a classical Jiffy Smooth.
Okay. That's
Yeah.
what I always ask people. Do you like, because Jif is like the no-stir. Do you have a preference as far as the oil?
Well, I know that theoretically probably the oil is better, but I do like the no stir. I
Okay.
admit it.
Me too.
Yeah.
I don't want to work for that. Yeah.
Whatever plastic is stabilizing
Yeah.
it, whatever.
Let's see here. These are all pretty random. Do you have a favorite Dorito or Takis flavor? Do you like Doritos?
I do like Doritos, and it's Cool Ranch for me.
Okay.
Yeah, I love a Cool
classic
Ranch.
flavor.
Yeah,
Okay.
mainly because I can eat a lot more of them. If I eat the hot ones, there's a limit to how many I can eat. And
Yeah.
the cheddar ones, probably a limit, but I could probably do a whole bag of Cool Ranch.
They're good. I mean, yeah, it's part of the appeal. Do you have these? I don't know. Sometimes when I ask these, I feel like I'm just grossing people out. But do you have a favorite Taco Bell item? Do you like Taco Bell?
I do like Taco Bell, and whether it's good for me or not is a separate issue. But I do like Taco Bell, and my favorite two items are, I don't even know if they serve this anymore because it's been a while since I've been there. I love a Mexican pizza
Me too. Yep.
at Taco Bell, and I am a plain old bean burrito
Okay.
with onions.
The bean and cheese.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love it.
They're good, and I also say this a lot on the show. They're good leftovers. It's one of the few items that keeps in the fridge. But
Yeah. It's absolutely foul food, and it's delicious.
yeah.
Yeah.
And a little note on the Mexican pizza. It went away for a while, and then it came back like 2 years ago, and people were like really happy that it came
I
back.
really like the
because
Mexican
I like
pizza.
it too.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite fast food, or is there? I know it's like, because like I said, I feel like I gross people out with these, but I know these are all generally unhealthy like food questions.
Yeah. I would say, and I don't eat a lot of fast food, although I do desire to eat it. I just physically cannot as much anymore. I love Wendy's. I like
Wendy's is great,
I like a number one, not the double, the single patty, a Dave's hot and juicy single.
Okay.
I'm into that.
Wendy's is fresh, never frozen.
They're fresh, never frozen. I admit to, I really like Chick-fil-A.
Chick-fil-A's great.
Yeah. And I like their plain chicken sandwich.
Not the spicy.
I don't like the spicy one. I like the plain chicken sandwich. And then, I'm a sucker for a Big Mac.
They're great. Yeah.
I love a regular Big Mac. I was very upset when the Mac Jr. went away because I felt like that was the healthy option. Maybe that's come back too. But sort of weirdly, I also like McDonald's chicken biscuit for breakfast.
Okay. I love breakfast sandwiches.
Yeah.
So I don't even know if I've had that.
Oh,
I mean,
you
I
should-
love the Egg McMuffin.
Oh yeah, try the chicken biscuit.
Okay.
It's good with a hash brown.
I love their hash browns too.
That is
They're good,
good.
I was gonna say I did try. They had a chicken Big Mac recently. This was like last year, and I tried that, and it was like, I mean, the regular Big Mac's better, but it was okay. It was like an interesting take on.
You ever watch the movie House Guest
No, I don't
with
even know
Phil
that.
Hartman and Sinbad?
I'll have to check it out. I love Phil Hartman.
Check it out. So I love him too. And the point is, Sinbad's pretending to be a vegetarian, but he loves McDonald's. And there's a scene where he steals a Big Mac from a child.
Little healthy competition might be good for her. It'll keep her on her toes, right?
Because they're that good, you know. I was gonna ask you, have you tried I'm probably saying this wrong, but the Jollibee, you know what I'm talking about? It's a Filipino fast food that just opened at Beaverton, and people were like camped out overnight.
Oh,
like,
that sounds good. I would try that.
I've been wanting to try it for years because it's like, some people probably don't like it, but their menu's like huge, and they have like spaghetti and stuff like that. It's just really eclectic, I guess.
Oh, I would try that.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't tried it either. I gotta try it. Do you have a favorite type of French fry? Do you like crinkle cut, regular cut, curly fries, waffle fries?
Oh, I'm generally I love French fries in general. I do like a waffle fry.
The Chick-fil-A waffle fries.
The Chick-fil-A waffle fries are good. I would also like to just mention a tater tot.
Sure.
Because I also love a tater tot. And generally, if I'm given the option, unless it's like fish and chips or something, but if it's a burger and I can get tots with it, I'll probably try the tots.
That's good, because I always ask people, like, some people get really upset that I consider those all French fries. Like, it's like fried potatoes.
Yeah.
It's just a different form. But some people are like, well, it's totally different. And I'm just like,
It's basically
the
it's
same.
a fried potato. Yeah. I get it. But I like waffle fries, and then I'm not really a fan of like really thick cut fries.
Yeah,
That's not
steak fries.
I'm not really for that.
Okay.
But when it comes to a fried potato, I'm not really a discriminator. I'll eat most of them.
It's all good. Yeah. Just got a couple more here. Do you have? Sometimes this takes a while. Do you have like a cheese ranking? Like I go with really boring ones like provolone, Colby Jack, Munster.
Oh,
They're kind of like
like
that's
which
just
way
what I like.
which way are we ranking them?
Just top to bottom. I don't know if you
Top
throw
to
out a
bottom?
couple favorites that you have.
I love a blue cheese.
Okay.
And there's some great Oregon blue cheeses. In fact, I think there was a creamery down in Tillamook that won best beat the French. I think even
Really?
like a few years ago. It was wrapped in a grape leaf.
And it wasn't the Tillamook.
No,
the company.
I don't think so. No, it
was like a
wasn't.
local thing. Or something.
Yeah, but I generally like, I like cheeses a little bit far afield. I don't mind a stinky cheese.
Okay.
I don't know if I can rank them, but
No, that's
I like a funky cheese.
okay. Do you believe in aliens, Bigfoot, or ghosts?
I believe in all three, actually.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I'm a trifecta. I believe in all of them.
That's the first. I'm so happy to have that answer, because most of the time people are just like, no.
Oh no, I believe in all three of them. Bigfoot, because we're in the Northwest,
Yeah.
and I think, I know it's a little bit out there, but if you look into it,
I've had the guy. He has a museum in Boring, Oregon. He was on the show Finding Bigfoot. He was on that show, but he came on here and we talked about it for a long time. But it's like, even as just like a tourist thing, it's like, it's kind of cool.
Yeah, I believe in that. And I think we're foolish not to believe in other life in a universe. There's probably some aliens. I would even go so far as to say I hope there are.
Yeah.
That would be cool. And ghosts, yeah, I think anybody that's lost someone important to them, you'd be hard pressed not to believe in ghosts.
I like it. I would agree with that. I'm a little less on the Bigfoot one, but like I said, it's still fun to entertain the thought of it. And,
Well, no one's proved that Bigfoot doesn't exist.
Yeah,
So
sure.
in the absence of that,
right. I always ask people, like, did you have a good meal or even just a local business you want to shout out recently? Like, is there some place shout out?
We love Masu Sushi downtown. It's probably our absolute favorite go-to sushi place.
Okay.
And we tend to be creatures of habit. We'll find somewhere and just keep going back, which is horrible because Portland has so much great food.
Yeah.
But we love Masu Sushi.
Okay.
So that's probably like a repetitive one.
I don't know if I've been. Are they like big giant roll, regular roll size? Or like
All
okay.
yeah. They've got the big ones, and they've got nigiri and sashimi and regular rolls too. It's on like in between Burnside and 12th.
Okay. East or west?
Like
You're
all
saying
the-
downtown, right?
like downtown.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, downtown. Like right up from
West
Powell's.
Burnside,
Yeah,
yeah.
West Burnside.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. That's about it. I mean, is there anything else you want to talk about before we wrap it up here?
No, I think people are probably sick of hearing about housing. So
Well, yeah, thanks for coming. You're always welcome back. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah,
Learned a lot.
I did too. Thanks for having me.